All right. Welcome, Dr. Berry. So nice to have you today.
Good to see you, Chia-Li. How are you?
Doing well. Would you be able to do a brief introduction about yourself so then our faculty member who is watching this knows your expertise and we can begin with the Q&A session?
Sure. So I am Dr. Charla Berry. I am an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Education. I teach in the Ed Leadership Program, working with our students who are teachers and administrators, and I teach a number of research methods courses. So it's good to be chatting with you today.
Cool. And we have another faculty member just show up in the session. So hopefully that she will be able to ask some questions. So with this high flex teaching model, would you share with us what is the definition of high flex?
Sure. So Hyflex teaching is really about it's a hybrid model, it's a flexible model, and it will allow some people to be working remotely and some people to be working face to face. But you're really doing all of those things simultaneously. So you may have some students in the room with you and then some students working with you at a distance. And so it's just a flexible kind of hybrid model.
And I think that for many faculty members that I spoke to regarding about this hybrid model, high flex model, there are inherently a lot of issues that they have to deal with. For example, um, they have to mine a group of students in Zoom,
Mhm.
which is one computer that they have to mine during the teaching. And then they have another audience who is in the classroom. That's another set of the computer they have to monitor as well. And
Mhm.
at the same time, they have a whiteboard behind them. They have to also make sure that their sound is projecting good enough so that the owl is picking up their sound.
Mhm.
And I have also have seen faculty member actually still wear mask
Mhm.
as a safety precaution.
Mhm.
So there's a load of questions. So my first question is, how would you recommend faculty member to do a decent job in terms of mining the Zoom audience, the classroom audience, at the same time messing around with multiple devices in front of them in the classroom?
Sure, sure. So I think that's a great question. It's a big question, right? So I think it's first important to begin your class with a really clear agenda just for yourself and for your students of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So that includes kind of your goals for the day. That includes a time schedule if you're able to have that, if you're able to identify some breaks. And that really helps, I think, especially for our students online, because if they need to step away, they may not be able to whisper to someone, hey, what's going on? Or if they get disconnected. And so it'll also help keep everyone on track as far as the pace. Within that, so I know one of the tricky things, especially about using Zoom, is that the chat is always going, and so that can be very distracting. So you may want to have very clearly scheduled and delineated question and answer periods. So you can tell your students, hey, at 1:30, I'm going to stop and take questions from the chat. That way things aren't happening and you're having to do all of that scanning. Obviously, folks can still ask questions and things come up, but I think creating those very clear kind of guidelines about how and when you'll be engaging with people are a really good way to kind of start to organize yourself so that you're not constantly getting very scattered and kind of scanning in that way. So those are just some things to start. I don't know if you had any questions or thoughts just about that or if that resonates.
Yeah, so in terms of the chat, so you mentioned about really, it's just really what you're saying is to set the expectation of what I'm planning to do today, right?
Mhm.
And then have a specific space and time that maybe you will do the chat and things like that. So my question regarding about chat is oftentimes the students will be storming and talking and doing things in chat. And for me personally online, it is really difficult to monitor the chat at the same time watching what students are saying. Sometimes they will be saying versus typing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I have done in the past was I usually assigned a team captain of the day. And
Mm-hmm.
then I asked a particular team captain, I will give that person a co-host, right? Just in case if I got bounced out, students are not lost in the classroom. And
Mm-hmm.
I will ask that team captain basically monitor the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And he or she, their responsibilities basically kind of yelled at me and say, listen, there is a question that you didn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
that helped a little bit. And I was wondering, are there any other type of suggestion that you would recommend in terms of monitoring the chats while students are interacting? You are busy listening to other students. What is your
Mm-hmm.
recommendation there?
Sure. So that's a great point. And I like what you said. I would so my only thought is that some students may feel shortchanged by that role and feel like, oh, I don't want to do that. So just really giving them some ownership as like a moderator, and even having like teams of moderators or groups, and alternating that role so that everyone knows that, okay, we have ownership in this, and from time to time we will be called on to kind of be moderators or just kind of fielding to that. You can also disable the chat, and enable it, so that maybe if folks are feeling completely overwhelmed, or again setting those expectations for people that if questions come up, I am going to stop every 10 minutes or so, or every 15 minutes, to kind of field these questions, but it may not be ongoing, just because in a practical sense that may get very overwhelming. So those are some things to think about. I think assigning those moderators is great. And then, sorry, there was a last point to this that just escaped me. But yes, I think assigning the moderators is a really great step.
And the other questions that I have, this is probably something that I heard from mostly undergraduate school, because in the graduate school in my class, I don't see that. So this may be because of the undergraduate students that is not used to the Zoom meeting. What I've heard and what I've seen is that students oftentimes just come into the session with the camera off.
Mm,
And no matter how you encourage them, they tend to turn it off. And I don't necessarily really uh, require students to do that. You can't require students to do that. And I know that there are millions of reasons that they may not want to do that. But when I do the breakout room, as an example, in the breakout room, then I see if they have been working together for a while, they will turn on the camera, they will be talking to each other. But sometimes students just completely turn off their camera for the entire semester. So what are some of the suggestions that you have helping faculty member encouraging their students to turn on the camera, and so on and so forth? So they are not so reluctant to show themselves, if you will.
sure. So I think that it's very important to try to establish the expectation early on that we are visible. I think it's okay to be transparent and say, I know there are a number of reasons why that might be hard, and even outline what some of the reasons are. But then also talking about the impact on the community when students aren't visible, and just saying that it really helps me to be able to see you, it really helps your colleagues to be able to be visibly and visually engaged. And I think really making that personal appeal. I think it's also helpful to frame it to students as one about accountability. So I know even for myself, right? If I'm in a Zoom meeting and I don't have my camera on, it's really easy for me to,
Multitasking.
yeah, to be multitasking, to be cleaning my house, to do other things, and I don't mean to, but it's very easy. So being visible helps me focus. So I would frame it to students
Right.
that way. If you're struggling, if you feel you might miss out on content, use this as a way for engagement. So I think really highlighting the positives, the very real impact and benefit of learning. I think you can check in with learners and just, folks that are never engaging or never using their camera, to say, hey, I'm wondering how you're doing, what's going on. And I think those are about all the things that we can do. But I think just being really transparent about, here's how this impacts me, here's how this impacts the group, here's how this can help you. So in light of that, and just really norming, right? And you have to be so plain. I had some students, she would always drive and be on the be
Yeah,
on
that
the
was
group.
one question I have for you as well.
Yeah. And I didn't know that, but like whenever I said things, she would be very slow to respond. I guess she was waiting till she could pull over. And then so finally I said, I'm just really confused. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm driving. And I'm like, no, and just so highlighting that there's a safety concern with that. And we want folks to be safe,
Right. I
yeah.
in the before the class begins, I usually send out an announcement. And in
Mhm.
the announcement, which I have to change because of some FERPA rule, one of the rules that I highlight in red is you are not permitted to drive while attending class. It's
Yeah.
the safety reason. That's number one. What I used to do is I require students to have the camera on, but I no longer can do that.
Right.
I have to, instead of saying that, so for example, you need to be in front of the computer, you cannot drive. Here's the reason, because I'm expecting each one of you to present in the class, actively participate. So I have to change my language so then they know what to expect. And I will tell them that not only there are assignments you have to do, you have discussion, you have to participate. And so it was my expectation at the very beginning. So right now I don't have anybody driving
Yeah.
to attend the class, but occasionally I will run into students where he or she will say that they're running behind their schedule. They just left their office. They will
Need to
be home
call
in
in.
20 minutes. So they are calling in, but as soon as they arrived, I can see that they turn their camera on and they're on the in front of the computer. So that's really interesting. And I really never thought about people could drive and listen to a class.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of it, but that's kind of the difficulty that people could do anything. And I think it's important, and you can use these as a norming way, like, okay, what kind of online behaviors work for us as a group and what don't? Does it work for us as a group if people are exercising, while they're taking class? Because I've had that happen. Or
Really?
yeah,
Exercising and taking
yeah,
class.
people doing like a
Wow.
full workout routine. So just being really transparent about like how all of those things may impact our learning, but also I think the more engagement opportunities that the course has and kind of almost requires, the less opportunity you have for people to turn off their video or whatever. So it's kind of like even us, right? If we log into a Zoom meeting, we can kind of tell in the first 5 or 10 minutes, what is it going to be? Is this something I
Right.
really need to listen to, or can I have it in the background and wash my dishes? So if you're doing things like making use of polls, people can't hide behind. It's kind of hard to answer, 5 or 10
Right.
questions when you're driving. So wow, I may have to participate. If you're saying, I'm going to hear from 5 people about this question, and, we select them at random, kind of like popcorn, I know some people don't like to do that, but I think at the graduate level, it should be okay.
Right.
If people know I could get called on to answer, wow, I might have to be engaged. If you have portions of your class that have to be facilitated by students, and that's something I would say, even as we do this Hyflex, take some of the pressure off of yourself. You should have a small portion of each class where
Mm.
students are leading a discussion, a dialogue, presenting some content. And that could be the virtual team, that can be an in-person team, could be a mix. But, have the students participate. And I think when we do all of those things, it will be very hard for people to just totally, be in the other room, doing a yoga routine or something.
Right. And I thank you for pointing that out. I remember that even for students or presenting, I don't necessarily give direct feedback. I
Mhm.
will be asking students, as a matter of fact, I will be asking students saying that when you are listening to another person or another group present, here are the things that I'm looking for you to do.
Mhm.
And so as soon as the the presentation completed, then I rotate to those other listening students, if you will. They will then jump in and providing their feedback about the presentation, make recommendations. So I'm trying to make sure that they are actually listening and participating in some way. So you're right. So that having that transparency is really critical to help students engage in the classroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the questions that I asked earlier regarding about the complexities of multiple devices in the classroom. Now, I haven't really physically taught in the classroom with all the equipment that the owls and things, but I've been there and I've seen faculty member done that, and I have observed a few sessions where faculty is actually doing multiple things. But I personally, usually when I have an online session, I would have 3 different devices in front of me, just because I have multiple devices for multiple purposes. And so I'm kind of used to the multiple devices, but I have to say it is really, really stressful because my iPad will be doing the annotation. I usually write on top of it. So then students actually see on the PowerPoint what is the important point, what is an example. And then I have my main machine that's where my video and my sound coming through. And then I have my PowerPoint on the separate machine. So then it doesn't necessarily jump up the bandwidth, if you will. So would you be able to talk a little bit about how faculty member could do in terms of multiple devices that you have to manage, which is very stressful on top of the topics that you have to cover?
Absolutely. Yes. And so, and like you said, for me as well, I have not necessarily taught in this type of really enhanced setting, but we do a lot of this naturally with the rapid home setup, trying to have all of our devices. I think in this context, it's really helpful to think a lot about the flipped classroom model. And I think that could be a real tool here. So you might remember a few years back, flipped classroom was really popular, but basically the idea is
Can
that
you talk about what is a flipped classroom
yeah,
first?
absolutely. Yeah. So the idea is that students do a lot of the direct learning kind of outside of the class. And then you come to the classroom kind of ready for learning and discussion, right? So typically, what we do, say we have a chapter on leadership and management. You, as a teacher, will probably stand in front of the class and lecture about here all, or maybe not you, but other people will kind of lecture and say, here's what a good manager is, here's all these things. But you can imagine trying to have your slides and your whiteboard and all of your different tools is really, really hard. With the flipped classroom model, you might record yourself talking or record a video or assign another assignment that helps students understand the concept. So by the time they get to class, then they are just bringing forward discussion questions. So it's not the first time that they've heard the content, is you introducing it in a live session. They've had some time to sit with it and work with it. Or you can also be extending the learning by having, say, a group work activity when we're together. So when we're apart, we do the learning, we read, we annotate, we answer questions, and we come back to our class session ready to kind of reflect. So it's a subtle shift, but for my folks that really like to lecture or kind of be showing a lot of different things, it can, in this Hyflex, probably take some of that pressure off, because you can kind of more control your teaching by doing some of it asynchronously, essentially. And then the class can be a more discussion, which could be more manageable. So that's one way to kind of think about things. I have other ideas, but I don't know if you had a follow up about
Yeah,
that.
I have just a follow-up example of that. So I know that oftentimes faculty will be telling me that it's really hard for students to read ahead, right? We all want to have students read ahead before they come to the classroom, so then we will have a meaningful discussion. And over time, I know that everyone is busy, and even if you ask them to do something, they may or may not get time to do it. So I ended up designing these group presentation, if you will. The reality is a group presentation, that one group may cover one chapter. Second group could cover another chapter. In reality, I'm forcing them to read one chapter before they come. And I only give them 5 to 7 minutes to present, meaning that I only want them to hit the highlights.
Yep.
And then once they've done that, this discussion goes on in the classroom very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But that does take a little bit of design in how you wanted to organize your activities in the classroom and how to balance the students' assignments, if you will. Because I'm always having that group presentation, they have to do that a week before. So
Mm-hmm.
then when they are in the classroom, they're all prepared
Mm-hmm.
pretty much in at least one chapter from one group to the other. So that will be something that I recommend people to do, but it does take a little bit of design ahead of time, if you will.
Yes. And you know what? I love that you said that because, too, if you norm that as an expectation earlier on, because you're right, for whatever reason, people kind of have an aversion to reading and they feel that they're so busy. But when you say, oh, this is a group project, that you all are working in and that you're responsible for, and this project requires you to do the reading, right? People are a lot more likely. Another thing that folks tend to like is kind of like annotated readings. So when
Mm,
you yourself have questions along with the reading, or it's almost, it's like this study guide kind of thing in culture. So whether you're creating that study guide or creating that reading guide and even grading that is another way. Often discussion boards too, I think. Just thinking about them particularly as a tool to support our Hyflex learning, right? I know there's mixed feelings about discussion boards, but it would help us do a lot of that early prep, just even by asking those basic questions. What are three main findings from this reading will ensure that either people read or they at least read what their colleagues wrote, and therefore they have a
right.
stronger
There's
baseline.
always, you can
you know
always tell that they are reading the colleagues right
yeah,
away.
it kind of dominoes. So even with that, then we can talk about the importance of assigning roles in the discussion
Right,
board so
right.
that everyone can't pair it, but that some people are raising an argument, maybe some folks raise a counter argument, and maybe other folks provide an example. And so you can set up a similar structure too in your class where you say, okay, 5 people are going to be called on to summarize our reading at the top of class. 5 people are going to be called on to ask questions. 5 people are going to be asked to bring in examples from current events, and you can pre-assign those folks, or if as you get more comfortable with the group, it can be more interactive. But just letting people know, how we're going to use this reading and how we're going to be accountable for it, I think can go a long way.
I think that one of the things that I tried this semester of the terms was I summarized what the 5 or 6 major points that I hear from the discussion or assignment. But
Mhm.
instead of just talking about it, I just have one word as a bullet point, if you will. And then I kind of show one bullet at a time.
Mhm.
But the very first bullet shows up, I also have a student's name, 1 or 2 names there, their first
Mhm.
name. And I would say, hey, John, would you mind to share with us, what did you talk about at this point?
Mhm.
And ask another person, share with us with another point. So it actually turned that summary into a group, I mean, into a class discussion, because almost every student is being called on
Mhm.
regarding about, because they wrote something that is different compared to other students, or the reason I call on them was because other students didn't even think about it, but they
Mhm.
did. And so it's a good way of summarizing, these are the points that you ought to be think about when you are doing this type of planning design, things
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's something that I tried this semester. I thought was very, very successful, having
Absolutely.
students participating in the classroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, Multiple devices.
Oh, yeah.
We
So
were talking about multiple devices. What other suggestions do you have? Sorry, I kind of
sure.
just
No, I get
hijacked your
that.
thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And so with the multiple devices, obviously it's about practice, practice, practice. So another thing you can think about when you're in the high flex space is setting up kind of stations so that students know where you're going to be working, right? So and I draw this, I used to teach elementary, so we did like these station learning stations a lot. But essentially, you can't be everywhere at once, right? As a teacher, even in this high flex setting, it's going to be very hard. So I would imagine that if you schedule and say, okay, For the first 10 minutes of our class, we'll review our core concepts, we'll take questions. Then from the next hour, we're going to do these learning stations. So for example, the people on Zoom, you might be in breakout groups and you might be discussing X topic, and maybe the instructor will sit in on those breakout rooms. And then the people in person could be doing something else. So a different station or activity, either
Right.
one that's more manageable for them or it can be less manageable. So, but somebody has to be doing kind of a manageable independent activity, and other people have to be doing an enrichment, maybe that the instructor will pop in, because if the tasks are too complex, it will get very messy, right? But you could say, okay, in-person folks, you're going to read and review this chapter. You're going to work on your project, which is an essay or whatever they have to do. And then on Zoom, they might be having a more interactive discussion that you can watch and moderate. After a period of time, say 15 or 30 minutes, you can switch and have each group do the opposite thing. So then maybe you'll go work with your in-person students, and then the students online will switch to a simpler task. But being really clear about that and even scheduling that out makes it so that in practice, now you're no longer managing all of these devices, but you're just on Zoom for 15 minutes, or you're
Right.
just in person for 15 minutes. So giving yourself kind of that schedule and also giving the students those manageable activities so that you don't have to be in all those places at once.
And I thank you for recommending that. And I don't know if Linda have any questions, but I wanted to ask you a questions regarding about audience. I have seen a big difference between the undergraduate students versus graduate students. Our graduate students are pretty much 100% working professions, if you will. Um, and I also have opportunity to work in the corporate environment where the corporation hire me to do things. So I kind of have a three type of audience experience where I see that undergraduates oftentimes are a little bit more hesitate to participate, or should I say shy, a little bit more shy in terms of how they want to participate. And then the graduate level, I think in the graduate level, if I were able to successfully at the very beginning of the term, helping them to do presentation, ask them questions, they open up very, very quickly. In terms of the adults, I mean, actual working adults that you are facilitating strategy sessions with them, that also takes a little bit of time to warm up. Sometimes it takes a good half a day just to warm them up. So I wanted to see if you're, in your opinion, how could we as a faculty quickly assess the audience and then potentially can provide some sort of quick strategy so then we can get the participant warm up and engage quickly?
That's a great question. And it is a really hard one, I'll be honest.
Hold on one second. I think
Sure.
Linda has something to add. Go ahead, Linda.
I was going to add that in my class, I have the benefit of having a small number of students. However, I constantly call on them, and as we talk about points, and so they are so used to participating now that whenever a concept comes up, I'll ask them a question, then I'll ask the next student, and we'll go around the room. So I told them that this is their time where they can participate, because I said in the future, you're going to be sitting with a client and they're going to ask you the question. And that's when you want to be comfortable answering. So practice on me. This is the time to do it. And if it's not exactly the way you wished it came out, it's okay. This is your safe space to talk. And I found that really effective because they all participate through the whole class, and they take turns. Like if somebody's computer freezes, somebody jumps right in and answers the question. So it's been helpful because I set that expectation from day one.
Oh, that's a great suggestion there, Linda. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that, Linda. And so yeah, I think it is kind of setting that expectation earlier on, but I know it's easier said than done. Sometimes people get really nervous about talking right off and they feel they don't have the right answer. So you could do a number of things. I think you could begin with polls or something interactive. And I know especially undergraduates liked kind of gamifying things. That way you can also make the learning visible, right? So if I have some factual questions from our textbook and I want to ask them, and then the poll will allow me to share students' answers, here's the answers they responded. So if you didn't know the answer, you could see the answer on the screen. And if you did, you would start to feel confident, like, okay, I'm on the right track. So that's one way. And then drawing information out of the poll. And whether that's an informational poll or an opinion poll, where you could say, okay, people that had opinion A, please share. And now we know that some people have this opinion. So I'm like, I'm going to sit here until somebody shares. And people from opinion B, please share. So polls, you can also do something like a think, pair, share, where you're really clear about here's the question I'm going to ask. Please, let's all take 5 minutes to reflect on it. Then we'll be in small groups or a pair, because it's easier not to talk in a group, but it's really hard, I think, if it's just two people to not talk. So it gives them more of an opportunity to break that ice, pair up and discuss, and then say, I'm going to have some of the pairs share out so that people feel a little more confident and able to discuss, but letting them know, like I said, it's hard to hide in a pair. In a group of 3, it's easier to hide even, or a group of 4, but in a pair, are we really gonna stare at each other? And we might. If you really feel they're still not participating, you can have a Google Doc for all the pairs and say, I want everyone to write their answer in the doc. That way you can see in real time who's participating, and you can call on people from this doc. So then okay, Linda has an answer. So it's not totally cold calling her because I see she wrote something. And then we see, okay, Mike, he's just not writing anything. Like, I can message him and be like, hey, or I can go into his breakout room and sit there, and then Mike will usually talk. So I think kind of those kind of really highly structured activities to break the ice. Also just really, again, norming right off that I want everyone to talk, even by asking how their day was. Like, I will sit when I'm with the undergrads and ask each person by name. How are you? How are you? How are you? And it just gets them to know that I see them as a real person behind the screen, and they're not going to like trickle to the background. Finally, I will say you can share your questions beforehand with students. And I think, again, this is really important when you have some students online, because folks may get disconnected and stuff. But more to the point, if you have kind of your agenda, your questions, your discussion points listed, people that do get lost, they can easily jump in. And people that might be nervous and need more time to think about it, they will have that opportunity.
So I'm so glad that you, Linda, mentioned about the safe space expectation to practice. You mentioned about polls and then pair in the breakout room. And you're right, having a pair in the breakout room is really, really difficult to hide,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when you using the Google Doc to do report back, I actually have students use, instead of Google Doc, using PowerPoint. PowerPoint or another type of Google Doc, that what I would tell them to do is I don't want them to do random thoughts. I tell them that the section that they are answering is actually part of their assignment. So as they collect their thoughts, that actually could go into their final assignments. So they are actually cumulatively saving their materials until their final presentation of that particular segment. So those are all very great point in terms of helping faculty member get more engagement from the students. Speaking of poll, just out of curiosity, do you use the Zoom's poll, or do you use some other kind of poll software?
sorry, Zoom. I haven't necessarily used Zoom poll so much. There's no reason for that. I was using Kahoot, which
Okay,
was
you use
the
Kahoot,
website.
okay.
Yeah, because the students, it has music and, now the downside I think with Kahoot is that you kind of have to have a cell phone and a computer, but most of our students do, or many that I've worked with, so they can kind of text in their answer. So that's just what I've used, but it's to personal preference. But Zoom, I'm sure it's also fine. And I know that the Zoom, again, I haven't used it, but I believe they will allow you can do an anonymous poll, or you can do a poll that's not anonymous, and you can see who said what. So if you want to use it more for an assessment tool, you have that opportunity.
So I also don't use Zoom's poll. I use poll everywhere,
Mhm.
where the students, I will actually be able to see the result of who answers what. But I found that the poll everywhere has a lot more flexibility. For example, if the answer is yes, no, or ABC, the students will be able to immediately see everyone's results, right? What they are picking and choosing, and then we will have a discussion. We'll have discussion, even though I don't right away know who answered B and A and B and C, but students will immediately see that. And as one student talked about their answer, you will see the graphics changes because people are changing their answers. So I think the
Mm.
poll everywhere shows a little bit of dynamic activities and brings a little fun, just like Kahoot does as well. I've also seen other faculty member use the Zoom's poll where you could, it's a little bit more rigid where you answer it and then you can see the result of it.
Mhm.
I don't know if you can export that or not, but I have seen faculty member use a Zoom poll, but I just haven't been using. I did not think it was flexible enough for me because the poll everywhere, I can embed that into my PowerPoint slide.
Yes, exactly.
So Hosean just joined us. So I wonder if Hosean or Linda, do you have any additional comments or suggestions or questions in terms of the Hyflex teaching sort of best practices, if you will? We're just sharing the best practices here. Linda, go ahead.
One of the things that I start the class off with is asking them how they're doing on their projects because they had some end of the year projects, and I encourage them each week to work on the relevant chapter of their project at the same time we're doing the module in class. And so I said, if you have a question, the other students probably do, and to make sure that they didn't leave this to the last minute. And not only did I find this effective in having them getting their projects completed on time, but we had an assessment that's due on Friday that they didn't expect that we the last minute, and told them that this was going to be due this week as well. And 2 out of the 3 are completely done already, and one of them only has one module left to do in it. So I thought that was very telling for students who may not have been used to the course load to work so proactively. And I think it has to do with the fact that we would talk about where they were on the project or the assessments or whatever at the beginning of class. And as they talked about it, they felt more comfortable moving forward and getting it done.
So I'm glad that Linda mentioned about, basically setting the expectation, anticipating activities ahead of time. One thing I do wanted to mention was Linda actually used a hand feature that she raised her hand. So I was able to see that in the participation list. So that's actually a great feature. I should probably ask students to do that as well. If you raise your hand, I would know that you have questions.
Yes.
So thank you, Linda, for doing that.
You're welcome.
And Hosean, do you have things that you want to add or ask?
Hi, sorry, I was a little bit late because I got stuck with a meeting with one of my students. So I'm just I need to catch up with the topics that you guys discussed.
Yeah, sure, no
At
problem.
this moment, I don't have any questions, and sorry for being late. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Hussein. So Charlotte, are there any other additional type of best practices that you would recommend us to do in terms of, other than multiple device, multiple different groups of audience, some in the classroom, some in a Zoom, and what other recommendation would you say?
Um, well, I think that, there's no reason for your in-person students to not be engaged in the virtual space as well. So you could have them open up Zoom as well. They could participate in those chats. It can be a two-way interacting thing. I think this is just evolving too. And so let the students kind of determine what they need. You might just survey frequently, especially at the halfway point, understand what things can grow and what changes, understand what's working and what's not, so that you're not just hitting your head against walls or doing things that aren't working. And yeah, I think that flipped classroom space where you're doing a lot of asynchronous learning and the class really is for that discussion. The students really always value that opportunity just to talk to you, talk to each other about how they're doing, as Linda said. So I know we are often focused so much on our content, but those discussion pieces are really going to be what helps students feel strong in the course.
I remember, as you are talking about, I remember one time I have to convey a very difficult concept. And this is more theories than anything else, but the textbook has so many numbers to illustrate the concept. And I have to break it down to basically one line of calculation before I go to the next line. And with doing that, what I found was if I don't do it the way the textbook was designed, I ended up doing the way that I gave them one line at a time. And then after I walked them through one example of one calculation, I gave them an Excel file, which already pre-fill some of the formulas in one column. And then all I'm asking them to do is to actually perform the calculation in the breakout room. And so what happened with that was I realized that because of the fact that I slow down, break it down one line at a time, then I push them into the breakout room. I give them 10 minutes to work. Basically, they know the answer. They just actually have to actually perform the calculation. I found that was very, very refreshing because then students actually got the concept because they actually were working on it. And then when they return back to the main floor, I asked one of the groups to share their Excel file with everyone in the classroom. So basically, whoever share is actually driving, not me driving. I'm no longer have the PowerPoint. And the students was driving how they come up with the answers and things like that. And then because of the fact that they're doing the calculation, somehow their calculation is dynamic. And I start asking them, okay, so if there's a tax impacted on this, what do you think is going to happen with the number? So they first didn't know what to answer that. And I asked that person, why don't you go ahead and change that tax number from 21 to 25? Let's see what the answer is. And then so immediately the students immediately can see that there's a correlation there. But all this time they are driving, not me. So I thought that was very good that you pointed out. And I actually tried that. It was actually working pretty well.
Yes, absolutely. The more opportunity students can have to drive the learning, the more interactive it will be.
Linda, any other thoughts, suggestions?
No, this was very interesting and informative. I appreciate it.
Yeah, because I figured that there are so many great teachers out there. We also need to learn from great teachers, how they teach in the classroom. And Charlotte is the expert in this area. And
thank you, Charlotte,
for sharing that. Are there any additional resources that you might be able to point us to? Thank you, Linda.
At the moment, not necessarily. It's just such a wide open field, but I think just Googling Hyflex, folks will find like the exact tailored things for what they need.
One this is probably my personal question than anything else, was I was very concerned about if in the classroom where you have all these devices, right? You have to mind the Zoom, you have to find the classroom, you have to mind the people in the Zoom. At the same time, you have to wear a mask. Do you recommend the faculty member wear some sort of microphone? I ended up searching something on the internet, trying to figure it out. Can I have an amplifier? So then in case if people can't really hear me when I'm having the mask on, what's your recommendation there?
I hesitate to make a recommendation there. I think I'll let the university kind of decide. And I haven't tried it. I am curious about, what it could mean for accessibility. So I think coordinating with Students for Disability Services, if they think that the need for amplified sound is important, and just testing it out and practicing with your students it will also be, so I don't really have an answer there.
It's interesting when I Google it, and I did find one elementary school teacher who done all the research on that. She actually have a list of amplifier model that you can actually wear in front of your chest. So
Mhm.
while you talk with the mask on, that may not, because it's actually blocking your projection. So with the mask on, and then if you have that little microphone in front of you, and it actually amplifies in the entire class. I thought that was very, very interesting to see. Basically, we just all become a tour guide. That's basically what the tour guides use in terms of the microphone. So that will be something interesting to see, that when we actually have to wear masks in the classroom, have multiple devices to handle, at the same time, wanted to make sure students can hear us. That will be one interesting to see what the university recommend.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be a big experiment.
More experiment to come.
Absolutely.
All right. Are there any other final thoughts? Linda, you have something to say? Go ahead.
Say that I would imagine when there's just the noise of the classroom, it will be hard for the people even on Zoom to hear you unless you
Right.
have sort of amplification. I ended up buying an extra microphone for myself for my class just because if I turned my head, I was afraid they'd lose something that I had to say.
Right.
But the classroom mirror and people coughing or moving their chairs or whatever, it's going to make it more difficult to keep the Zoom students engaged without some sort of amplification. So I appreciate that suggestion.
Right. And one thing that I heard from other professor was, if you are in an outdoor classroom, there's a lot more distraction to it, because you may have garbage trucks coming over, you may have landscaping crew going through, you may have wind, you may have rain. And so
Yeah.
I have no idea how those faculty members survived doing all these very difficult outdoor teaching environment.
Yeah, it's hard. You're going to have to take a lot of breaks and really check in with folks to make sure students are still with you. No
Right.
questions are coming up. That audio, frequent sound and audio checks. It's going to be an interesting journey.
It's going to be lesson learned for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your wisdom, and thank you, Linda, for sharing your fabulous tips with us. And I don't know if Hosean have anything to add or questions. Hosean, do you have any questions to add or any suggestions?
No, actually, but I'm going to check out the recording for sure. So I'm excited.
I can send
learn
those
from
to
this.
everyone. It's actually very interesting. You're talking about the microphone, right? The amplifier.
Well,
Oh, I think he's saying the recording of this session.
Oh, the
yeah,
recording of the
recording of
session.
this
Okay,
session.
I wasn't paying
Yeah.
attention. Such a bad student here.
No, actually, yeah, but yeah, in my classes, I'm teaching 3 classes this semester, and in all of them, I only have a couple of students. And the point that Charlotte mentioned about asking students to open their laptops and join the Zoom in class so they can actually interact with other students in Zoom. That's a great point. And I think my students, all of them, they do that in class and are engaged with other students on the other side, and they can actually discuss, especially because we have like projects and students have to work with each other in teams. So that's a great point.
I think we have come a very expedited long way, right, to this point. I recall several years ago, I was specifically told by the dean at a different school that do not allow your students to use laptops and cell phones and blah, blah, blah. Today, we are encouraging them have everything ready, right? If you have to answer your poll, get your cell phone out. If you have to participate in the presentation, get your computer out. And so it's such a big difference, transition in terms of today's like a multimedia type of learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you everyone for your generous inputs and recommendations. And I will make this available for everyone, for those who hasn't had the opportunity to participate today. And Charlotte, thank you so much. We're going to have you back at some point to have other type of online learning as well.
Absolutely. Yes. This was so great. Glad I got to chat with everyone.
Well, thank you guys. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend coming up.
All right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
You too.